and now. Take a clock. Now, the hour hand of a clock mimics the daily action of the sun. And nowadays, we're obsessed with hours and minutes because work dominates our life. You could say that work is part of our fundamental cosmology. But in prehistory, societies were rather more fragmented. There were certain unifying themes. They were all farmers, and farmers, I know, are profoundly concerned with the passage of the seasons. I'm very much aware in Orkney that the weather must really have controlled their lives. They must have feared and respected the elements. And they believed that the ancestors could intercede on their behalf, not just with weather such as storms and floods, but other things, disease, birth, death, and even the harvest. So that magnificent stone clock isn't a timepiece at all. It's one piece of a vast panorama of sacred structure, a monumental jigsaw puzzle which needs to be pieced together to be understood. The key is that the monuments are interconnected. The Ring of Brodgar is the beginning of a huge sacred procession. A processional way travelled a mile across the narrow peninsula to meet a second stone circle, the Stones of Stennis. To the east lies the magnificent tomb of Maes Howe, buried below a huge circular mound. The precision of Maes Howe is as impressive as any of the ancient monuments of Egypt. Its narrow entrance is aligned with the setting sun on the winter solstice, the darkest point of winter.
Now, look at that.
Oh, magnificent. Absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? Now, the sun would have come streaming down here when on
midwinter sunset. That's the dying sun, and yet it's at that very cold, dark time in this place, which is associated with death, that you suddenly have the light coming in. That's the time when we're moving into the season where things are going to start growing again.
It's a sort of symbol of life, isn't it?
Yes, and of regeneration.
Yeah. The cycle of the seasons meant something to the people of ancient Britain. Did they believe that human life too was cyclical? How do the living and the dead interrelate?
Obviously, with people coming in and out of the tombs, there was a lot of interaction between the living and the dead. And some people have taken this as far as to say this is a house for the dead, and you have houses for the living. Some elements of the layout of the tomb are similar to the layout of the house. We have the passage. And if you can imagine, I'm walking into either a house or a tomb. What do I see in front of me? Quite a large open area. Ahead of me in a house I would see a dresser. Here I see a chamber. On either side I'd see a bed. And here there's a chamber and a chamber. But the thing, of course, that's missing is the hearth, which is the heart, it's the life. It's absent.
And deliberately absent. The circular shape of all the structures in Orkney is no coincidence. These similarities are part of a pattern. Around Maes Howe, Jane has discovered the remains of pits for standing stones. Yeah. And how many others were there? Just the one?
Well, it's possible that there was a ring of stones surrounding Maes Howe or standing before Maes Howe was actually built. So it makes you wonder just how much they were moving standing stones around the landscape.
These 4 stones here, not actually performing any useful purpose, are they? I mean, they don't seem to go back into the wall.
No, they're not tied into that masonry.
They really are just standing stones, aren't they? But they're very striking.
Yes, and they would have been freestanding and then the tomb built around them.
Right. Extraordinary thought, isn't it? Just as a stone circle appears to predate May's How, Colin Richards believes a building or house may lie within the stones of Stennis. They actually picked up the stones and moved them over there. So this is the hearth that they found when they dug here, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Square hearth, just like the houses, single entrance, same spatial organisation.
But, I mean, I'm tempted to ask, if you've got a stocking great hearth like that, is there a house or big building actually within these stones?
It's just possible that there is actually a structure underneath here.
That's sensationally exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got a building, what in effect you're doing then is you're sort of monumentalising the building, aren't you, a house?
Yes, and it's the hearthstones which are always selected. Hearths were excavated out of houses and reused, linking the earliest inhabitants with later inhabitants of the house.
So sort of linking back to your ancestors.
Yes.
The tombs have actually grown out of stone circles, which themselves have been built around the remains of houses. What did all this mean? Let's begin to fit the jigsaw puzzle together. When individuals or families die, it's likely that their houses were left to disintegrate. The house leaves a scar on the ground, a memory of the people who once lived there. In time, descendants built memorials to their ancestors. Massive stones are quarried, transported and arranged in circles, recalling the round houses in which the dead had once lived. Still later, huge tombs replaced the stone circles, incorporating individual stones, all on the exact spot that once housed the living. Tombs and stone circles did not just resemble houses. They were actually built on top of them. Unlike today, where we separate life and death, confining our dead to cemeteries, the ancient Britons wanted to be close to their ancestors, who were thought to protect the living.
I think what's going on here is we've misconceived the stone circles. The way in which we conceive of these things is a remnant of old reasoning. If you shift the object of study to people's lives, people lived at Barnhouse. They go through a series of rites of passage that involve these monuments and maybe end up being buried or burying people in May's How. So, you know, if you start to think about people's lives and less about the material type of monument as archaeologists, you can see how they all operate together. I'd say at a push you probably are dealing with a commemoration of perhaps individuals. Simply by dragging a stone in, moving it past other stones, you're almost reciting your kin by virtue of your movement around them. You're reciting a family history, a genealogy.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think it really does bring these stones to life. Immortalised in stone, the dead ancestors of Orkney are constantly visible on the landscape and in the homes. These people celebrated the presence of the dead and the lives of the living. Moving through these monuments was an act of memory and of respect. Understanding this mighty procession through the sacred landscape will help us to reconsider the most elusive of all ancient British monuments, Stonehenge. A huge advance in archaeology was made possible by the introduction of aerial photography after the First World War. Squadron leader Gilbert Insel, a pilot fascinated by archaeology, spotted something strange in a field just 3 kilometers from Stonehenge. It was December 1925. Excavations revealed 168 post holes. Mike Pitt showed me around.
This is one of the bizarrest sites in British archaeology, I think. It is a fantastically important site, although it looks odd.
These concrete stumps represent 6 enormous circles of wooden posts, some of which stood over 7 meters high. Known as Woodhenge, this structure has been a vital clue in unlocking the enigma of Stonehenge.
This structure is contemporary with Stonehenge. Yeah. It's very similar in scale, and this concept of concentric rings is, of course, the same. Like Stonehenge, it's precisely aligned on the midsummer sunrise, so there's that very direct symbolic link with Stonehenge. But here, there were people holding ceremonies and feasting. It looks as if they were feasting and killing in very large numbers young pigs. So here there are ceremonies involving large numbers of people, whereas at Stonehenge there are very few, by comparison, very few artefacts. And if you go out of the entrance, straight down the slope, you get to the River Avon, which snakes away just out of sight over the ridge there. And you can follow that river down south for a few hundred yards and then pick up the avenue earthwork straight into Stonehenge.
The journey is possible to trace in the landscape. Close to Woodhenge, the procession meets the River Avon, which snakes round and turns south. It meets the beginning of a ceremonial avenue leading to Stonehenge in the direction of the rising sun. This ceremonial avenue has almost been ploughed out by modern farming, but early aerial photographs reveal it clearly.
It has to be one of the really dramatic entrances for any ancient site, I think. This extraordinary arrangement of stones, when it was built, for the people who saw this going up, was completely unique, nothing like it anywhere in the world. And then when you come through, it's fantastic, isn't it?
It's astounding.
This sense of enclosure and the different scale of the stones, these little blue stones sort of crowding round us like people from the past. These really were seen as ancestors. And that they've been brought over, and then the Sarsens put around them to protect them, to enclose them.
Both in Orkney and at Stonehenge, the circles are deliberately lined up with the rising and the setting of the sun.
These little blue stones come from the horizon over there to the west, which is where the sun sets. And the timber henge here, the big one, Woodhenge, is over there in the direction of the sunrise. You wonder if there is a connection between sunrise and sunset, between birth and death. And the stones are associated with death and the ancestors, and the wooden henge is associated with life. And so you have ceremonies at Woodhenge where a lot of people, a lot of noise, people who recently died are involved in ceremonies that are beginning to take them into the world of the ancestors. and they travel from Woodhenge across the landscape, down the river and up the avenue into the centre of the circle here, where they join